Hi, and welcome to the Revolutionaries. I'm Jeff Damaris.
I'm Tina Duryea.
And I'm Shannon Riley.
And we are here this week in our fourth episode to discuss the states. And so a lot of discussion has been made about how Trump is using the federal government to extend authoritarianism across the country and what lines of defense exist for that. So we've talked about how the vitality of media. We've talked about the importance of understanding our rights. But we also have to look at the lines of defense. And one of those lines is our states, our federal system. And while it's not perfect, there are certainly things that are problematic with some aspects of it. It is a way to try to be a bulwark against authoritarianism. So the first thing is, what is, how does this federalism system work? Now, this is like sort of civics 101, but the states have rights and powers based on the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, which allows that the states can use their own constitutions and their own laws to govern within their borders. And that anything that is not in the Constitution specifically mentioned is deferred to in the states. Of course, federal law exists as well. So the question we really look at first is, how have we seen particularly in the last 2 years, the states come into play in protecting our democracy as much as it can. So I open up to the floor. We'll start with either of you guys, whoever wants to ring in first, about what states have done recently, and then we'll kick off the discussion, then we'll go from there.
I would love to just jump in first and then let Shannon have a shot, because when you're talking about states' rights, I always have a very bitter chuckle about the Republican Party always lauding states' rights when it comes to things like abortion. They promised us that when they got rid of Roe, that would just be would become a states' right issue, so that the poor women who live in a red state would basically have every single right to abortion stripped from them. But those of us who are still in blue states would still be able to have our abortion care. But they have been steadily chipping away at that ever since Trump became president again, because the whole stripping away abortion rights on a statewide basis happened under Biden with the Supreme Court, and now Trump is trying to very slowly erode women's access to reproductive health care and other things in blue states. And so I think that I just find it, when it's a Republican issue, it's about states' rights, and when it's a Democratic issue, it all of a sudden becomes a federal issue. So Shannon, what do you think?
I really agree with you, Tina, obviously. There's, I saw a t-shirt, and it said, women's rights vary by state, men's rights don't. And, that really sticks with me, for the fact that I have a lot of what we call pocket friends. So for those that are unfamiliar with that term, it's people that on the internet, but you don't know in real life, that you talk to or whatever. And they live in a variety of states. But I've had a lot of friends who have needed to pick up and move their entire families due to changing laws in the states that they were calling home for trans rights, for LGBTQ, marriage and stuff like that. And also just vaccines and stuff. There's a huge disparity. And I go back to the whole reason that the Department of Education was created. It was created because states were not giving the same educational opportunities to their, to everyone. And like the federal government stepped in and said, like, you know what, we're going to federalize this so that we make sure that there are certain things that everyone is guaranteed, and that like we're making sure that like, that states aren't segregating our, our schools and all of this other stuff. And now we have an administration that is dismantling education, like the education department. And yesterday, I actually was at the Bethel DTC picnic, and Governor Lamont was there. And part of his speech was that he wanted the state of Connecticut to take over special education. And I'm like, my brain goes like, oh, but that didn't work out before. But then now I'm sitting here, I'm going, no, we're in a blue state right now. And right now that would make sense because the federal government is attacking special education services. But again, we're about to elect our next governor. What if that's Ryan Fazio? We don't want that to be Ryan Fazio, but those are the things that go in my brain.
No, we don't want that.
No.
But I think it's a really valid concern, but I think it's more likely going to be 2030 that Ryan Fazio is a real contender. And so to your point, the same thing happens. So even if we have 4 more years of Democratic control of the state, I have very deep concerns about what's going to happen in 2030 in Connecticut and New York and in Massachusetts and, all those states. And so, yeah, it's great to have, a blue state that supports special education. But what happens if all of a sudden some idiots elect Ryan Fazio?
Yeah, I think examining sort of like the downsides of the state argument first is actually operative, because as you guys are pointing out, not all of the states have equal outcomes or equal potential outcomes. So you have some states that suppress women's rights, in terms of reproductive rights and other rights for that matter. Yeah. And you have some states that are more hostile to education or very don't care much about it, that would desperately need education reform. And it almost comes into the blue state, red state divide, where you can kind of see of different states have different outcomes. And so one might be looking at it and going, well, that's not great, because you want people to have the same opportunities across the board. You want children to have the same chances. And so someone might argue, and for a few years ago, I would have made an argument and said, well, federalism works in maybe more limited than it is right now. This is a few years ago, not today. Yeah. And I think what has educated us, particularly me, I shouldn't say us, you guys may have already felt this way, but what has shown me the difference and why it's important for these states to have their federalist separations is that there are places that value certain things that other places don't. Mm-hmm. And when you have a federal government that's openly hostile to abortion rights, to education rights, to LGBTQ plus rights across the board, then suddenly now you've got to have some way to protect it for some people, at least have a place to say, okay, well, we're going to put a firewall up. And I think that's where, sort of that blue state situation comes in. That's where the positive side is. What are your thoughts on that?
Like you were saying something about, and I think that there's a propensity for us who live in blue states to kind of feel pretty good about ourselves in some regards, right? Like I know that I am very grateful for the past 10 years that I do not live in a red state. So it does definitely kind of come in there, but there are problems in blue states. Like
definitely.
We're talking about education. We're talking about the governor's race here in Connecticut. And for those of us who have lived in Connecticut our whole entire life, we know that Connecticut is a very segregated, very unequitable state. We have some of the best public schools and some of the worst. And it falls on racial divide. And I've always kind of wondered why someone didn't just sue the crap out of Connecticut for inequality.
Somebody might be listening going, it's a good idea.
That's a great idea.
Talk about it, Attorney General Tong. I will talk to him about it anytime he wants.
Yeah. I do think there, again, we look back in the history of states' rights, okay, the claim of states' rights. Yeah. And we look back at what that has historically meant. And it's historically meant something negative. Okay. So in the context of slavery, whenever you hear people saying what was the cause of the Civil War, and people will say, well, you have, lost causers that'll say it was states' rights. And the fact is that it was a states' right for what? It was the states' rights to have slavery. Subsequent to the Civil War, after the Civil War ended and slavery was outlawed, incidentally, it is not completely outlawed. There is a provision for prisoners, and all of a sudden now you have private prisons, but that's a whole other topic, and we can discuss another time. But it's not completely 100% eradicated, unfortunately. Anyway, going back to this, subsequent to the Civil War, there was the states' rights to have different requirements for voting, poll taxes and things like that, literacy requirements or what have you, things that were exclusivist. And so there's always been this negative connotation with what states' rights meant because people had perverted what it really is. In our case here, what we're hoping to see what states' rights means is the state's right to protect its citizens from an overzealous authoritarian federal government that is trying to remove rights from citizens, not grant rights to citizens, which is, I think, a fundamental difference in these two positions on states' rights.
What do you think, Shannon?
I mean, I agree with Jeff. I mean, and like we talk about how our Attorney General Tong has been really like leading like the charge here against all of those attacks on like the federal government. Like he, expanded like the Trust Act, protecting those sensitive locations and accountability laws. Like, and I actually really appreciate the accountability laws because like it protected our right as citizens to sue the federal government when they've been interfered with our civil rights. So like every time like Tong has like a win, I'm like, yes. Yeah. But then it's like, is the rest of the state on the same page? Because, we also can talk about like how someone questioned Governor Lamont about like with the ability to arrest ICE agents who are masking, because masking has been outlawed in Connecticut, and who is going to, arrest these people or whatever. And he didn't have an answer. So it's like, well, what is the answer? Who determines that? Like, does it become like a local municipality? Like, do like individual, police departments decide? Like, are you going to enforce this
That's
law?
A fascinating point.
I will actually say,
yeah.
Matt Blumenthal made a video about it about a couple weeks after the legislation passed that was incredibly informative, but I can't remember the details. But I do remember watching the video, and he actually explained the process of how you would enforce the law. But I don't remember the details. I do remember him making that video that made some sense on that.
Okay. Yeah, I think when that question was asked during the debate, and I think this really applies. This isn't even unique to Connecticut because Connecticut has the law, yes, but this is something that has to be looked at in multiple states. In that, if an ICE agent is committing an extra legal act, okay, so an extrajudicial justice, or exceeding their authority. And there are, or even just wearing the mask like it is in Connecticut where you can't wear masks. They don't allow law enforcement to do that. then what happens? Does the state police or the local municipality police, do they enforce that law? And from what I heard, what the governor was saying in his part of the debate was, well, we haven't gotten to that point yet. It was like a wishy-washy kind of thing, and where Elliott, who is the progressive, is saying, yeah, yes, we have to enforce that law. And I obviously come down on the side with Josh Elliott on this, and what should be the case, like using in Minnesota as the example. What happened in Minneapolis? I mean, they executed 2 citizens, for no reason, using extrajudicial violence. There are judge, jury, and executioner all at once in 2 instances.
They did it in Maine like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, quickly. And right, exactly. It just happened in Maine 2 weeks ago. And so the question becomes, should the state be able to arrest them because they clearly did not follow procedures? Their lives were not in danger. There was no justification for any of those actions. And there are ones that I'm sure we don't even know about. These are the ones that we know about. I'm sure the ones that are just as heinous that we are not aware of.
What's interesting is that I actually made a video about this very topic about a month ago when the Connecticut had passed a law and there was some masked ICE agents were in Bridgeport or Danbury, I can't remember where, and they were taking people. And I made the video saying, what the fuck, let's do something about this. And what was fascinating to me was the responses I got, which was you had a lot of people saying the federal law trumps the state law. I hate to use that word trumps.
Yeah, I know.
Federal law trumps the state law, and the federal law says they can wear these masks, and the federal law says that they can do whatever they want. So fuck Connecticut is basically what all the Trumpers in my comments were saying.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, but does that mean that federal? It isn't even with the mask. I mean, the mask is one thing. I mean, okay, they want to make a justification wearing a mask is fine, but shooting an unarmed citizen for protesting is not covered by federal law. You know what I mean? Like there are differences in scale here. Like we got to take a quick break. I want to pick this right up because I think this is fascinating. And I also want to talk about election law, too, because we've had obviously some issues in terms of elections and gerrymandering and all of that. So we're going to get to that right after this. All righty, we're back now. So, okay, so we were talking right before the break there about essentially the masked ICE agents, the ability of states to have their laws in place to be able to deal with that issue and how to protect the citizens. And this is something that is real time happening. So we see these go on pretty consistently where there is an abuse of authority by ICE agents going after protesters. And it's not just the people that are shot and killed that we've seen, but it's also people that are just there protesting being manhandled. ICE agents going out of their way to do this and to do it with masks. Now, I think the thinking is that a lot of these ICE people, a lot of the newer ones are January 6thers that, suddenly got a new job with a nice bonus or whatever they got. So they're getting to live out their Dirty Harry fantasies or whatever the hell is going on up there. But I think the importance of making sure that we enforce these laws is very paramount. For states to enforce these laws is very paramount to protect the population. I'm a little surprised it hasn't been more widespread this summer. I think maybe the stuff that happened in Minneapolis caught them a little bit off guard and how the public was going to react. So I think that might have helped. But, we'll see how that goes. The summer's not over yet, unfortunately, and plenty of time.
I have a theory, which is I think that the Republicans realized that was going to drive people to the polls against them. And so they told Trump that he had to rein them in until after the elections.
Oh, I wouldn't be surprised. That's pretty good. That's probably right. Yeah, that's a good guess, I'd say. Yeah, it doesn't look good. And speaking of elections, of course, it turns out that we have an election this November. I don't know if anybody's familiar with this, but apparently, and we do it every year, it turns out. But this one is the most important election in our lifetime. Well, I mean, every 2 years we have the most important election of our lifetime because we seem to keep messing up somehow the previous most important election. So
Yeah.
it leads to another one. So here we are again with the midterms. And obviously election law is being attacked again by the Orange Menace and his minions and his acolytes in the media. And so I wanted to kind of get your guys' views of Trump's ridiculous speech recently about election interference and everything like that, because that does hit right to the heart of states maintaining their own elections, because part of what he said in that insane nonsense was federal oversight of elections.
Okay. So I'm going to say Stephanie Thomas does an excellent job.
Yeah, Stephanie Thomas is our Secretary of State in Connecticut.
She's our Secretary. Yes.
Yes.
She is like, I don't know how that woman has as much energy as she does, but like she is on top of her job. She is everywhere. I have no concerns when our elections are in her hands. Yes, we have had issues in certain, places in Connecticut, but they've always, it's not like they've been hidden. Whereas when you look at the 2 presidential elections that someone won, there's been actual proven interference in governments by foreign parties.
Right.
Also, it comes out in a lot of red states where people who are dead are on voter rolls and are shown as having voted. I don't know how it happened. But I can only say from my experience watching my own town registrar. I mean, I go to the logic and accuracy testing, and where they sit, they code all the machines, they test the machines, they lock the machines after they've been coded and tested. Everything is so secure. And it's not just, one party sitting there. It is both parties. And then there is the public that is allowed to, watch it. And it's they tape those machines up, they lock them up, those keys get put away, and they're only opened on election day.
Right. Yeah.
So, Connecticut takes that very seriously. I always think back, remember the hanging chads down in Florida?
In Florida. Yeah.
It's we are never going to have another hanging chad issue. I mean, the only time I have sat through a recount where things have changed, and it's been because in Connecticut, we hand fill out our ballots. We use a marker, we bubble things in, and it's somebody might have put a little dot or something and set somewhere, and then an election official has to determine that ballot needs to be looked at, hand examined. It is then decided upon, and the determination is given right then. It's very transparent, no hidden agendas or whatever. But for someone to stand up on stage and continue to harp on the fact that there was election interference, but the election interference happened while you were in office.
Yeah, see, that never made any. I mean, how is he supposed to make this argument that there was cheating in 2020 when he was the president in 2020? Right,
yeah, it was your people in charge.
Yeah, and look at so there's in Georgia. Georgia was a red state. Okay, they had voted blue in that cycle, but the governor was Republican. The Secretary of State
state
is a Republican. And you have Trump on the phone with the Secretary of State of Georgia saying, just find me the exact number, whatever the number was, the exact number of votes. I mean, and to see him going on there and yammering about how, election fraud. Look, there's 50 states. So each state does their own elections. Okay. Now we can talk about whether or not there should be some standards to how elections are done.
I was actually going to come up with a devil's advocate thing. Which was, we were talking a little bit about how, we're grateful to have a Democratic governor now, but, 4 years ago, honestly, if Joe Biden was president and he said, I'm going to mandate some national kind of fail safes to protect our elections and take a little bit of that right away from the state to do whatever it is, because every state gets to do their own election stuff. So if it was Biden saying, hey, I want to make sure our state elections are safer, and he had like some sort of policy, like we're all going to use this machine that's unhackable, I would have been like, yes. But now that it's Trump saying, I'm going to do this thing. So it's a devil's kind of argument.
Yeah.
Because
it's a trust.
Yes.
It's
trust. When
trust.
you try to argue with a Republican about this, they're basically using the same argument you might use if Biden were president. And it is tricky.
Well, I think the middle road on that, and I think it's important that each state has its own election laws, because for one thing, it does make election hacking, the actual changing of votes, it makes it much more difficult to try to do that when you have different states doing it different ways, and versus to having one standard way everybody does it and it filters through the same system, at least in theory. But I do think that a standardization could be, where there's just some basic guidelines on how elections are held to maybe simplify the matter, so that if you live in X state or Y state, and not to restrict voting rights. I think that's also important. It's not something that whatever sort of limited guidelines that you put in there, it's not something that says so-and-so can't vote, or you need to do this, you need to do that. I think it's sort of just like a very, very small, limited structure in place. I mean, we sound like limited government nonsense, but that's
all right. Again, go ahead. I think one of the things, like when you talk to voters around the country, the fact that each state has such a very different way of approaching this. We have different primaries, we have different processes, we have different ways to vote. It actually makes voters distrust the system because it makes no sense, right? Like if I lived in Connecticut my whole entire life and I voted one way, and then all of a sudden I moved to, let's just say Texas to be really extreme, and now I've got to vote in Texas, then I'm like, what? It makes it feel like it's cheating that every state has a different methodology. And so, even something like, why does everybody have a different primary date? Why does everybody have a different election date? Why does everybody have different processes? It makes the voting population distrust the system.
Well, I think that's where the standardization, a certain part of standardization could be in, like everybody has the same primary day or something like that. The one pushback I'd put with that is that, and again, I was somebody like Shannon was mentioning, just like, hey, or maybe it was you mentioning it, but it was mentioned that, when it was Biden, it was you, Tina. When it was Biden, we were okay with it. And then now it's Trump, now we're not. We don't want to be hypocrites on this sort of thing. And I think, in my evolution on my view of this, it's been the fact that, we clearly have actors out there that are trying to influence elections in ways that are harmful to the United States. And their success is dependent upon how much they can do it. And there's very little or evidence of any kind of endemic voter fraud that has been presented. That isn't to say that it isn't there. It's just to say that it just hasn't been much presented officially. The quandary I find myself in when it comes to this is that we want to promote voting. We want people to vote, right? But we also want to make sure that we protect that vote. And protecting that vote is important, Yeah. And if we give the keys to people we trust, as you say, we're okay with that. But if you give the keys to people we don't trust, then it's a whole different situation. And if you look at the differences in voting, as you pointed out, I mean, in Washington State, it's all mail-in. Mm-hmm. It's 100% mail-in, you know? So that's where, you know, when it comes to differences, each state does do things differently. And like you say, Tina, it may create a bit of a distrust because everybody does it differently. But at the same time, because it's different, a singular actor, a state actor, you know, an international state actor, Russia or something like that, has to go and look at, we want to change an election in this state. Well, they do it differently than they do it in this state, and it just complicates the matter for them. I don't know. But what are your thoughts?
I mean, so I guess my thoughts are like, well, my parents moved down to Florida from New York, and I obviously, you know, moved to Connecticut. And the conversations that we have about voting are very interesting. Like Florida, I feel like they have like 3 weeks of vote, like pre-voting, where it's like you could just go in and vote. But like then we talked about like having like early voting or no excuse absentee ballot voting, and it's like they got very like oh my God, like how are you going to make sure that like the real people are actually doing what they're saying or whatever? And I'm just like, you guys can vote for like weeks and weeks and weeks. I'm like, but you don't have a problem with that. Like, that's okay. We could just go whenever we want, even though like there's still all this chunk of time beforehand. This was before like we had you know, early voting. And I was just like, I'm like, you do remember that the state that we lived in, like you all just went on one day. It was on the same day, and you cast your vote, and like then we knew what the vote was. And I'm like, now you're in a state where it's like you could vote for a month, and it's like.
So there's a hypocrisy.
Happened? Yeah.
There's a hypocrisy in the kind of the views on that. Yeah. It's the same thing with the gerrymandering situation, you know, the hypocrisy involved in it. So Texas does their thing where they gerrymander the hell out of their map to get additional Republican seats at the instructions of the Republican president for the obvious and completely naked reason of getting more Republican seats. And then so the Democrats say, in California say, we're going to do that. Democrats in Virginia say, we're going to do that. Multiple states start having these battles of gerrymandering going on. And while the states have those right now, the issue, I think, overall is gerrymandering, which I don't like at all. But at what point is there a rationale for a blue state to say, we're not going to do that because we're going to stand on this principle of not doing that, when red states are going to do it without any concern of any moral right to do it, or whether it's appropriate or whatever, and lose control of the Congress when Democrats get more votes. I mean, where do you draw that line to say that a state shouldn't do something? And does the federal government come in and say we're going to outlaw gerrymandering? And does it have even a constitutional right to do that? Is that, or do we go under a 10th Amendment issue with that? So like the issue about the states in defense of the country, as we've been outlining, kind of goes up against some difficult hurdles, because there are some concerns about, there's not just blue states standing, 50 blue states that are standing well against a federalist or a federal government that's hostile. There's about 50% is about 25 is probably a little less even than that. It's probably more red states, I think. But it's not, it's some states are blue, some states are red, some states are purple, and you're going to get varied outcomes here. And do the combined blue states have enough punch to be able to deal with this? We'll come back from the break and we'll pick that up in just a second. Okay, we're back. So gerrymandering was what we were discussing. Shannon's got some views on gerrymandering too, so let's hear what she has to say.
So a couple years back, I attempted this thing with the DTC called like Reading with Intent, and like we chose books that would kind of help people understand certain concepts. And like you remember, like there was like the 2021 redistricting that happened in Connecticut or whatever. So we read this book by Richard Rothstein called The Color of Law. And he really like went into like why it was detrimental, what, the purpose of redrawing like these districts and stuff would do. And like it was a bit of a concern here where I live, because our Senate district got like, shifted. Our state rep districts got shifted, and it was like, what was the reason for including like a tiny portion of two different towns in with, this other portion? Or like, what was the reason for, including like this section that like is kind of like geographically not connected, because like there's water that is, in between that, that, you felt like that was there. So like, we really like talked about it, but like really didn't get to like why or how to like undo this. And like my feeling is that it should not be in the hands of lawmakers to redraw these maps, because they're making these decisions in the best interest of like their own candidates or themselves when they're doing that like it should be like an independent, like not party, because it's not the party, but like it should be like an independent entity that does this, that is made up of since we're a two-party system, like the two-party electorate or whatever, and have like an equal number of those people, but they can't be connected to a political like situation. Like,
the decision, right? Yeah.
The decision, like it. Well, no, like these people would have to be completely out of politics. Like they just might be like a Democrat or a Republican, but like they're not working the work that we do. Because like I probably would have an agenda if I was the one that was sitting on there, like that I would want to fix my district so that way it wasn't, always going to lean in one direction. Because like right now, the district that I'm in consistently for 50 years has leaned in one direction. But like, I don't understand. I guess we'll go back to, again, Connecticut versus New York here. We have like state reps or stuff, and we have, state Senate districts or whatever. But like in New York, like you have like a county legislator that is like the county line. And like that's how you do. So like when I got here, I was like, so who's the county executive, like Fairfield County? And they're like, there isn't one.
The what?
What do you mean?
The what?
The what?
Yeah.
I was like,
yeah.
And then I'm like, when I started like getting into politics in here, and I'm learning about like all these little like, kind of like little pockets of state rep like people that are on there, and I'm going, well, how did you people come up with this? Because like I'll give you again, because this is where I live, like the 107. It's all of Brookfield. It is a section of Bethel, and it is a section of Newtown. And I'm like,
well, I can tell you from my own personal experience, because I ran in a 32nd district in Connecticut, the state Senate district. And if you're out there listening or watching and you want to go look at the map of the 32nd state Senate district in Connecticut, it doesn't make any geographical sense really at all. I mean, it's contiguous in its way, but the tail end of this on the western side is a slice of Brookfield, which is how I know Shannon, and it's a slice of Bethel, and which are two different towns, obviously. but it runs a long different way with some towns cut in half and it's all designed to put voters in particular pockets so that they go, well, and so it's just to tell you that no state no state is inherently guilt-free of building up these types of crazy types of districts, because this is Connecticut, it's a blue state, and it's gerrymandered really to be a Republican seat, the 32nd district. So in order to keep other seats as Democratic seats. Yeah. Tina, I know you had stuff to say about this too, and I wanted to get your feedback on it.
Yeah, I think that this is inherently one of the big problems that we have in our country, which is that because these districts can be geographically manipulated for, our own purposes. Like I agree with Shannon. If someone gave me a magic wand, I would gerrymander the whole entire country to make it Democrat, right? Like it's not, not even a question. But the thing is that that's not fair. And like as much as I dislike the other party, I would. What are you doing? Sorry. I just had a dog walk into the house. Sorry. But like there is this thing is like Connecticut is probably 30% Republican, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you are part of the 30% of Republicans in Connecticut, you have zero representation in Congress. Zero. Because every single one of our representatives is a Democrat. Conversely, there are states that are Republican that have, maybe, I don't know if there's any states that are 100% Republican. Anyone know?
If you mean from their congressional delegations? Probably some of the smaller ones, like Wyoming, I think is, and, states like that.
So say you're a Democrat who lives in Wyoming, you have zero representation in D.C. as well. So, like, the idea for me that you have a sizable portion of any population that is not getting representation, whether it be in Hartford, in DC, or even in your own city council. Like my city is almost 100,000 people. We have 15 members on our city council. Yeah, I think maybe about 20% of our population is Republican. So theoretically, 20% of our city council should actually be Republican. Now, does it? And obviously I'm benefiting from all of this because I'm a Democrat and I'm very happy to live in a very democratic city. But in terms of actual democracy and representation, I don't think that we're doing justice to our ideals by having districts that are gerrymandered for everybody to have what they want to have.
This kind of
benefits me.
Yeah. All right. Well, because there'll be, for benefiting you, there's a Republican voter whose views are not being represented in whether it's on the town council or the city council rather, or whether it's in the state house or wherever it might be that the disconnect is, in terms of Republican minority, but there's nobody up there with my voice. There's always been this the discussion on the U.S. Senate and how the Senate is made up and everything. This is the same argument somewhat with the Electoral College as well, which is another state issue. So the Senate is designed with its 2 members because of the Federalist system. Every state gets 2 senators, so it's not population derived like the U.S. House of Representatives. So this is regardless of how anybody feels about whether that's the way we should be doing things in the 21st century, but that's just how it was designed originally. And
I just want to say, the whole purpose of this podcast is to talk about what the broken parts are and how to fix them going forward.
Right. Yeah, I was going there with this. That's where I was headed. Yeah, that's where I was headed. So, but that's the reason why they did it. Now, I think that if we're looking at ways to reform the Senate, for example, as an institution of representing the states, there's nothing to say that, at least as the way the 2-party system exists right now, you have 1 Republican and 1 Democrat. Now, again, that's a reflection of a 2-party system, and whether we should have a 2-party system is a different conversation that is going to evolve as we go in the show. But in a 2-party system, you can have, or it could be somebody who is, if you have multiple parties, you can have one that's a liberal or one that's a conservative or what have you, so that you have somebody with the voice in there to say, and it's always an even number. So that means that they have to talk to each other in order to get anything done, because you'll have an inherent 50-50 Senate. all the time. It'll
Are they
always be
deciding
50-50.
who's being the vice president?
Which makes
Yeah,
the vice
deciding
president important.
yeah.
Now the vice president has a really crucial role because the vice president is going to be the tiebreaker unless you get compromises going on. But the point being is that, and of course you can always change. If we're talking about changing things, you can always change that too. I mean, but the point being is that it's important for us to recognize the value of the state. Between whether it's lawsuits that like our attorney general here, William Tong, has done, or Letitia James's actions in New York, or what have you, any of these different states' attorneys generals to protect the citizens of their states from federal overreach or federal abuse or authoritarianism. There's still the question of whether or not federalism works in the 21st century. This is where the question of the Senate comes into play, whether it should, it's popularly elected now, but whether it should be more proportionally represented. If it is, then isn't that what the House of Representatives make? Is that what it does? And the Senate serves, whether we should have a Senate at all. And the same question about the Electoral College. The Electoral College, which I think is insane at this point, was designed because of the Federalist system. I mean, there's the giving extra potency to the less populated slaveholding states. That was one of the other reasons why they established it. So it's archaic in that way. But, these reforms, when we talk about the importance of states, it's recognizing first that there are value to having these states existing as their own political entities, if for no other reason to be the laboratories of democracy, as they have historically been, to try out new programs and new approaches and to see if they work on a state level and they translate out to a federal level. But there are these drawbacks where Wyoming citizen has more proportional representation in Congress than California, even though the population differences are enormous. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about the states, and again, this is not a thing that we're going to solve today, we see that it can be a bulwark against Trumpism. We see where it can be a bulwark against Trumpism, whether it's protecting its election laws from being manipulated by the Trump administration, or whether it's from our attorneys generals in each state protecting against federal overreach from executive orders, and there's a whole different litany of them. But we also have to recognize the weaknesses that system has and the vulnerabilities it provides so that we can react to it. And when we're looking at building up for a future, what a refounding of the country would look like, how federalism in the 21st century would look like. So this is sort of like the first point in a longer discussion that we're going to have over the next X number of, years, I hope, for doing this. But it's a springboard to say, listen, states still, there's a reason why we're still the United States, reason why there still is federalism, and there are people that are of good character that are trying to protect us from federal overreach, and it does exist there. So if with the last couple minutes, some final thoughts from everybody before we wrap up this week.
I will say that I think that the way, what I'm getting from this entire episode conversation is that there is a real tension in the idea of federalism versus states' rights, and that it's I think probably crucial to what is problematic in this country.
Yeah, I agree. I think where we are is in that sort of moment where, again, when we talk about fixing the country from a fundamental standpoint, the country was founded as a federal republic, which is a type of democracy, everybody listening. And that just because something worked in 1787 and in 1789 when they did the Bill of Rights does not mean that it's static and it is the way we have to continue to do it. There are ways we can improve the whole while retaining the spirit of at least what we were looking at back then, and to say, let's take the things that work and utilize them because they do serve as a protection against tyranny if a tyrannical federal government stepped in, which we're kind of seeing right now. And also that we don't have such a disparity of outcomes for, let's say, children in school systems and education. And as was pointed out earlier, you get those disparities even in states, like Tina mentioned about Connecticut, about the racial differences in outcomes in Connecticut because of essentially more or less segregation that goes on here in the state of Connecticut. So this is a great discussion. I think obviously there's more to it than just what we talked about in the last 45 minutes or so. But I think it's a good kickstart for future versions of that conversation. So we thank you all for joining us. We thank, of course, Tina and Shannon for coming on here. So we'll be discussing over our next couple of episodes. We talked about education and education reforms. And we'll be talking about other issues. And we have also an episode coming out where I interview the progressive candidate for governor in Connecticut, Democratic State Representative Josh Elliott. So I hope you can see that. That will be coming out shortly as well. So until our next episode,